You're live. This is the first time I have ever tried YouTube Live. This is really scary. I feel like I'm in a tutorial, like one of those beauty tutorials, except for obviously not a beauty tutorial. Okay, I'm just maybe gonna do that a little bit because I know it's. Is this working? Right. Okay, we've got a few people here. Hi! I'm trying this for the very first time, so I'm really sorry if I do anything wrong or anything is really strange. Okay, so we're here today to discuss something that I think is very important for a lot of people during this time. Hi, Lindsay. That is the subject of staying inspired. I don't know if that's back to front. Is that back to front? But obviously for a lot of people during this time, I know a lot of young people are sticking to fairly routine but at-home school schedules. And I know that they are being given a lot of work to do. But for a lot of people, time has become this sort of open-ended, slightly unstructured, I don't know, we're like swimming in time. And for that reason, to learn to structure that time and to break up your, where you receive energy from and where you receive inspiration from is a challenge for a lot of people. I just want to start off with a quick story, which is that I left the Yehudi Menuhin School when I was 15, and I went to stay with the wonderful Alison Rind, who was the official accompanist at the Menuhin School at that time. And I had gone from a schedule at the Menuhin School, which was literally from 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening. We had prescribed things to do, to suddenly my time was my own, and it was extremely overwhelming and took a good portion of time for me to actually get into some kind of rhythm and to exercise a level of self-discipline that I had never I'd never known before. Anybody that practices an instrument understands about self-discipline, but this was like another level. So that experience was a huge learning curve for me, to understand that inside your mind, and it's something we spoke about a little bit the other day on Instagram Live, but inside your mind there are all sorts of avenues and choices and compartments that you can unlock, and the difficulty is to put yourself in a frame of mind through which you can actually make choice, as opposed to being in a reactive state. So I thought it would be helpful, and well, I hope it will be helpful for me to go through these. These are meant to be top 10 tips, but they're not at all because there's 11 here. So I'm going to talk through each and every one of them, and hope that, you know, we come up with something that is helpful for somebody. So the first one is to take a step back from endless repetition, look outside of the problems you're facing and get some perspective. So when I talk about endless repetition, I immediately think of walking down the corridors of any music school or music college, and you listen to musician after musician repeating things again and again and again and again. And what we are trying to do with our instruments is really difficult, not just with instruments, in any single profession. Of course, the act of repetition solidifies not just the thought process, but muscle memory, and breeds that kind of familiarity with a thing. But to be in a state where the thing that you're repeating is not at all containing negative unintended consequences is extremely difficult. So good afternoon, Bob Cairns. Thank you so much for joining. I'm sure it was Lindsay that set you up with this. To take a step back from the repetition and ask ourselves some basic questions. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? Is it actually Is it actually yielding results? Is there structure to the repetition? Or are we just burrowing down a certain path that actually perhaps has no specific purpose? So to get perspective, sometimes you need moments that literally like snap you out of this kind of funnel that a lot of the time we're just inside of. So I would encourage you to come up with little mechanisms that snap you out of that thing. So something that creates diversity or creates a kind of interruption. It's not something that I actually do a huge amount, but I wish I did, which would be to set an alarm so that I have something that actually interrupts what I'm doing. That's not good to do all the time, obviously. If you're making huge progress and you're going in a direction that is definitely bearing fruit and that's getting somewhere, you don't want to be interrupted. But when you're doing something that you know is in that kind of repetitive frame of mind, I think that's a good time to do things that will actually kind of almost like short circuit what you're doing and bring you out of it and create that diversion and that moment of gaining perspective. The second one is that your frame of mind is everything. So many times in my life, I've got myself into a real negative spiral where my own state of mind makes everything so much worse and harder. I've written down, if this is happening to you, do anything but practice. You'll only solidify mistakes. I have taught countless masterclasses, individual lessons, and large group lessons. Hi, Martin. We're on YouTube. And a recurring issue that I see for so many people of all ages is that when things are going wrong, what do we want to do? Grip hold of that thing as tightly as possible and force change. And what happens when you're in that state? One, you're in panic mode. So nothing in your physicality, your mental state, all of the ways that we problem solve and have actual kind of channels of intuition running through your body and through your mind, all of those are in kind of lockdown because you are feeling under pressure, you're stressed, and you are not thinking in the most productive way. So to try to fix problems in that panicked state is largely unhelpful. And the thing is, the more something has gone wrong, the more desperate you are to fix it. I have tried every which way with so many different students to try to ask them to trust me and convince them that what I'm saying in that moment should be more powerful than the emotion that they're feeling. And what they're feeling is, I made this mistake and that mistake, I need to go away and immediately practice for another 5 hours because that's going to fix problems. And this is just not true. You have to understand that, just like the point says, your state of mind is the most powerful thing that you can access in terms of making improvement. So look after that. Find yourself some inspiring, role models or mantras or what are they called? Sets of belief systems or philosophies that allow you to gain a perspective that is uplifting and positive. Now, don't mistake that or converge that with the idea of not putting pressure on yourself to either be diligent or disciplined, work hard, or be serious about things. Those things are not mutually exclusive. They both can work hand in hand. So a positive frame of mind that allows you to be thinking in an intuitive and instinctive and creative manner, but couple that with diligence and discipline. So to recap, your frame of mind is everything. So number 3, this one is a little bit difficult to approach at the moment, given the lockdown and quarantine that so many of us around the world are experiencing. But this point was written 6 months ago. Go outside and see some of the world. And I've said for the little ones with your parents, please. We get physically static and very one track minded. If I could actually turn back time, I would see more and practice a little bit less. So I think given the spaces we can actually occupy, of course, if you're in the privileged circumstance of being able to either go out in the garden or take walks or go to the beach or whatever, then of course make use of those things. But I think for so many of us, that space of like that diverse space can exist in lots of different forms. It can even exist within a device, it can exist within a book, within viewing visual art or listening to music that is stimulating in ways that are different to the experience you're having with your instrument. So I would say it's just a case at the moment of getting creative with that. But comparison and diversity is hugely important in terms of clarifying the thing that you're doing in that moment. Often we can't see what we're looking at because we don't have that comparison and we don't have that diversity in our minds. So to create as much of that colourfulness as possible will hopefully help you clarify your objective when you're practicing. Contextualise. Look at the rest of, this is point 4, contextualise, look at the rest of what the composer wrote to get to know him or her, not just the piece that you're playing. I think this you know, it's generally something that most teachers would advocate for, of course. It's something that we have all been taught. You know, if you know something more or feel closer on a personal level to the individual whose music that you're playing, I would suggest that that gives you it just gives you a more immediate and personal connection to that expression of that composer. I think there's so many different ways that you can do that. I mean, I wouldn't do it in a really forced analytical way. Obviously, different things work for different people, but for me, just to have more of a process of general absorption, like, and ways that you can relate to. So many people have told me over the years, if you're trying to learn something and it only feels like hard work, you haven't found your path and your way of studying that thing and learning that thing in the most effective way. And they say that for learning music, learning language, learning maths. There are ways that you can attach yourself to a subject that is very substantive and complicated and that is hard work, but that you do it through a way that is enticing and inviting. So I think the same can be true for contextualizing with any piece of music that you're learning, and with anything, in fact, that you're trying to learn. Relate it to the things that are most easeful for us: storytelling, emotion, personal relatability to the thing that you're reading about or that you're hearing about. All of those things help solidify the experience. And something that I've been speaking about quite a bit before, which is combining all of your senses. You have your emotional makeup, you have the actual tactile senses, you have the thought process that you go through. All of these things, if you combine them all, they strengthen your memory, they strengthen the experience that you have, and they strengthen your connection to that experience. But I mean, I'm thinking of an Elgar project that I have been doing recently, playing a lot of his shorter pieces and the violin concerto, and to try to understand, as if Elgar was, you know, a relative of mine that I just never got to meet, try to understand who was this person, like how many personal accounts could I come across. And of course I can also read dissertations and books on that are more analytical of his musical style and his musical influence, but to understand, where did this man's life path and to music and connection to music, and basically what was he trying to tell us, and what was the point of him trying to tell us those things. So I tried to approach it from the most personal possible perspective, and it certainly helped a lot. And those personal things can very quickly turn into musical specifics, how you ebb and flow within a certain thing, or like how aggressive you want to play something, or how whether you think somebody's music should always be light and airy and fast, or whether actually you think the more time you give that person's music the better, which is how I feel towards Brahms a lot of the time. Like just give him as much space as humanly possible, because he has a lot of ways to fill that space. Okay, number 5. Look at all the things that other people who play your instrument do. Watch and learn from them, but please don't just copy. You have to balance what you see with who you are and what you want to sound like yourself. Right, so I just think of all the times that I came across somebody playing an instrument where I just couldn't believe what I was seeing and what I was hearing. The first time I really experienced that was going to Yehudi Menuhin School, and we drove into the way the school's constructed is all of these buildings around a central courtyard, and we drove into the courtyard, and it was kind of early summer, and windows were open all over the place and people practicing, and I knew that they were not that, I was 9 at the time, but I knew many of them were not that much older than me. And I remember just thinking, I just don't believe that people my age are playing like this. How is this possible? And then getting to know the playing of violinists like Alina Ibrahimova, who's, he's one of my best friends, and I love her. But at the time, I just was like, how can somebody just a year older than me play this stuff in this way? But through the process of seeing what was possible, I began to think that it was possible. I began to think that actually this is something that I could do. And you immediately hear that and look at how can I apply this to my own experience and to my own physicality with my instrument. I remember another time when I was about 16, and I was having some lessons with Walter Stewart, who was a great violin teacher who sadly passed away now, but he let me listen to, he just put on a whole series of recordings, ones that I hadn't heard before, and many from people that he knew personally, so again there was that personal connection, and I again was just desperate to pick up my violin and see what can I do to imitate that and to sound like that. But I'm also saying don't just copy. Always use your intelligence and your ability to discern what sounds authentic when you try it. I've heard lots of teachers say to me that their students turn up and they literally are presenting an interpretation of a piece that's just a massive random hodgepodge of all kinds of different recordings that they've listened to. Try to avoid doing that. It's not the best idea. Okay, find the masters of your instrument across time and listen to them. It's incredible how much our ears start to adjust and improve through listening to great people. So I've just been talking a lot about that. Listen, listen, listen. And the more you repeat listening, don't listen passively. Don't just only stick it on in the background and go about doing your business. Practice listening in a way that's an activity that you take seriously. Listening well is one of the hardest things to master, and no matter your age, it's something that we can all practice doing a lot better than we do. So I would encourage doing that as a specific activity. But I've also said, don't just look for the most perfect performances. Look for something greater than that. Look to be moved. And that's something that is deeply subjective and personal, and nobody can tell you what moves you or what style you're most excited by. but that should be one of your main considerations. There's a lot of people that play well and play accurately, and can thrill and impress, but look for something deeper than that. Allow yourself to feel things as deeply as possible. This can be super uncomfortable sometimes because music doesn't just have feel good emotions, but a lot of painful ones too. However, if we want to play better, it's really important to feel things and get comfortable with being in discomfort. So that's something I personally did very instinctively from a young age. I was moved to tears a lot playing and listening to music when I was really young, like when I was 6 or 7. And I was never scared of that emotion, and I guess I'm still not. You know, I'm somebody that would be very, very deeply affected and moved by an experience of someone else, and certainly by music. I mean, even if I've gone to see a symphony 1,000 times, I'll still cry. So it's just my particular experience. But I do think we are beings of imitation, and we practice the art of imitation from the minute we're born. You can learn to be more feeling and a more feeling person, and a more empathetic person. And you can learn and develop ways to stay sensitive and stay aware and stay, what's the word? I don't know what the word, like you, well, empathetic, which I know is a point that I'm going to come on to in a minute. But I think by and large, and this is not speaking for the whole world, of course, there are enormous disparities in how people live, but speaking of the UK in particular, by and large, in terms of what we experience on a daily basis, there's a lot of comfort that we experience, there's a lot of distraction that we experience, and there's a lot of, just comfort. So I think to put us in places of discomfort from an emotional standpoint, not only I think is that good, like from a human standpoint, but just like the person that you are, but it's certainly good and important for music making. Practice a sense of empathy is the next point, of course. Practice a sense of empathy, which can be channeled into your playing and make you a more sincere and dedicated musician. This can be practiced anywhere, in your family home, with your friends, when you listen to or play music, when you watch TV or read a story. And this is something that I, much like the activity of listening, I think this can also be an activity, and I actually think it's one that should be more present in your formative years, in the world of educating yourself than it currently is. Number 9, experiment as much as humanly possible. Don't just do what you're told. I've put don't tell your mum or teacher, though I said that. Don't just do what you're told. Try out things and see what works. The more I practice, the more I teach people about practicing, the more I advocate for experimentation. Experimentation can be cut up into lots of different forms of experimentation, but to be absolutely bold and fearless with how you try things and what you do and how you do it, and realize that every single system that we live within is the result of somebody's creation and somebody's idea, and that they were bold enough to come up with this idea. So for anybody studying classical music, it's always a challenge for us to combine anything that is tradition and something that is really inventive and personal and unique to now. But we can combine a sense of deep humility towards everything that is surrounding us and has come before us. I don't know how many times you've all experienced it, but I certainly have, right? I'm so proud of myself for having come up with an amazing idea that I'm sure is unique, and only to discover like lots of people have come up with it too, in lots of different forms from lots of different parts of the world. So to maintain a humility and always assume you do not know what you think you know is wise, but at the same time have that boldness and fearlessness to experiment and to come up with creative solutions to your problems. Empathize, yes. Sorry, I was just reading a comment, not related to what I'm saying now. Okay, number 10, don't always desperately look for answers and for more and more information to improve. Sometimes you just have to relax and let things come to you. You know, your instinct is deeply intelligent, so trust it. I caught the tail end of a kind of Q&A with violinist Callum Smart yesterday, who also studied with the same violin teacher as me, Maciek Rakowski, and he was just saying the most beautiful things about being in a state of freedom and a state of openness, and that of course that makes you deeply vulnerable and it makes you unsure, and any state of openness is an unprotected state, but especially within the realms of music, surely that should be the place where we test those boundaries and when we try to expose ourselves to that experience. And that goes exactly hand in hand with not necessarily always looking for an answer, always looking for specific information, always needing that security blanket around us, because so often that security blanket comes in forms of protectionism and comes in forms of if I'm for this, I'm against all of those things. If I believe in this method, it means that I don't believe in all of those ones. If I'm for this person's point of view, it means that I can't be for that one. And generally speaking, that is cutting yourself off to what's available to you. And it is sort of disallowing another layer of complexity to your thought and to your philosophy and to your self education. So don't always look to find immediate answers and to be comforted by specific tasks or specific paths. Allow yourself to be in that. It's not a passive state, but it's an open state to allow things to come to you. And last of all, sing and dance the music you're playing as much as possible and as often as possible. Sometimes connect it to basic intuitive things and it'll help you feel and interpret it better. I think I'm speaking mostly to classical musicians here. Like a lot of the time, because of our static relationship to playing instruments, we become disconnected to a physical embodying of the music that we're playing. And to break yourself out of that, put your instrument down and see what your body naturally, how your body naturally reacts to music. I mean, look at how children react to music all the time. So many of the things that we do are at our workshops, which incorporate instinctive reactions, are done best by the youngest. And we, obviously life and the aging process teaches you many things and you develop many skills, but in the process it's also a deterioration of, I think, some of our greatest attributes and our greatest intuitive and instinctive skills. A challenge for any musician, and one that I personally do not think is prevalent enough in the study of classical music, is to reconnect with those most intuitive and instinctive and creative parts of ourselves. It's very difficult to do that when combined with something so complex and something that takes so many hours of study, and that requires you to absorb so much information, but that is the beauty of something like the orchestral tradition, the tradition of playing complex, long music. You're combining two things that seem like they're opposites and forcing them together to create an experience of hopefully like heightened complexity and quality and emotionality and that all-round 360 experience. So with that, I think we've covered our list. I want to thank you all so much for joining me on my very first YouTube live. Oh my goodness, feels so strange. Did I just do that in exactly 30 minutes? That was my plan. I'm very impressed with myself. So I will be doing this again this week. I can't remember exactly when. And I think during that one, I will aim to actually answer some of your questions. I've seen that there are questions going as I've been talking, but I've just been focusing on what I'm saying. So next time I will be a little bit more interactive. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll see you again soon. Stay safe and inside, and lots of love.